Welcome to the Noble Gold Podcast, where each week the latest precious metals trends and alternative investments are presented to you to help create the foundation for your financial success. Listen in as some of today's brightest entrepreneurs share how they've strategically navigated investments that have changed lives forever. It's time to bring a little wealth into your life. Here's your host, Brad Dalius.
Welcome into the Noble Gold Podcast. Today we're talking about Bitcoin, and we're going to give you a guide to blockchain, everything you need to know about it and just what it does in general. And joining us today to talk about these things is SamRadocchia. She is the author of Bitcoin Pizza, the no BS guide to blockchain. She's also known online as SamRad. She's super busy right now, out on tour with her book and just spreading the word about Bitcoin and blockchain in general, but we're excited to be joined by her today. We also have Colin Plume on the line as well, the president of Noble Gold. Sam, welcome on into the podcast. How you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. It's great to have you on, and I know Colin has some questions for you here coming up as well, but I guess just to start in general, what has the feedback been like from your book and really just getting it out there to people, talking about it? I'm sure people have learned a thing or two.
Yeah, I mean, that was the goal. I've obviously been in the space for quite some time, and, I found that there are an abundance of resources out there that dive into either the financial elements of the technology or, the technical backbone, and they get really in the weeds quickly. And I found there just wasn't a lot out there for kind of a mainstream audience to make this stuff understandable, relatable, and most importantly, fun. So even the title is fun. Obviously, it came from somewhere. So, there's a holiday in the industry called Bitcoin Pizza Day that marks not actually the first transaction on the Bitcoin network, but, kind of it has been marked as the first real world use of the technology when a programmer named Laszlo Hanyecz bought two Papa John's pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. And obviously those are very expensive pizzas today. So it kind of got marked facetiously as a holiday. And, I think I just wanted to go through more of the cultural nuances of the technology and why and how it's changing the world and our daily lives, and really reached, a mainstream audience. So the feedback from those people so far has been that it's been, a fun read and a fun journey, and they come out on the other end a lot more excited and educated. So that's all I hoped for.
In regards to Bitcoin and then blockchain and Noble Gold, Noble Bitcoin, we help people that want to put Bitcoin in their IRA and some of the other cryptocurrencies. And I always get these questions of, you have Bitcoin, the price of it, and then you have blockchain. And, really in some ways, the technology of blockchain and the price of Bitcoin are sort of separate, I believe. They're two separate entities. Maybe you can dive into that and your experience and maybe your thoughts on that, two different things there.
So, I mean, of course, most people listening are familiar with Bitcoin and the underlying technology blockchain, which was proposed in its current state in the Bitcoin white paper, 10 years ago. But even before that, since the 70s, this term blockchaining, or having a chain of blocks using cryptography, has been proposed in a number of scenarios. So I think it's just the technology was popularized through Bitcoin. And the technology of blockchain, meaning a decentralized or distributed ledger technology where any transaction written on this network cannot be changed or altered, and consensus is formed through cryptography and computers, is very powerful. It's kind of getting into the notion of recognizing one, that in this globalized world that we live in now, that we don't actually have trust. And while we've placed trust in institutions, there are still trust gaps. And so it's aiming to solve kind of creating that trust layer in our transactions, whether you're transacting financial information or data, or things like that. So I think, yes, one, it's the backbone of Bitcoin and all of the other cryptocurrencies, but it's also a technology that is separate and can be used for other sorts of interactions or exchanges.
I've read a lot about why Bitcoin came about, and obviously nobody really knows, but one of the theories is sort of along the lines of what you were talking about, which is lack of trust in the banking structure. When Bitcoin was created, I think in 2009, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously we had just gone through the collapse, a lot of the big banks and the bailouts. And so there's a lot of conjecture that that was a reaction to that, and creating a currency independent was a way to say, hey, we don't need to have these currencies tied to central banks where, the banks can come in and manipulate the value on sort of a whim and bail out these big banks when, the average consumer, the average homeowner didn't get bailed out, yet the big banks did. So what are your thoughts on that theory as to why Bitcoin was created?
Totally. I do kind of go into that in the book. There's a chapter on Satoshi Nakamoto, the individual or group of individuals who, wrote the white paper and created Bitcoin. It suggests that Satoshi was not only a brilliant programmer, but also brilliant marketer. So the timing of the release of Bitcoin is certainly precarious. And, whether it was already, there were iterations of these concepts for years beforehand, and they didn't quite catch on. So you could say either it was, intentionally released following the 2008 financial crisis, or, it just so happens that it became popular because of that. I do think timing is everything. And so, I do see some correlations there. And maybe it just started to hit a point where, again, we couldn't ignore these trust gaps anymore. And we couldn't ignore that the current infrastructure, whether you're talking about banking infrastructure or governance infrastructure, I come from the supply chain world, like manufacturing and supply chain infrastructure, no longer really works for us in the current context or the reality of the world that we live in, which is globalized. It's, connected by the internet. We have supercomputers in our pockets and mobile phones, and yet we're still operating, again, with these institutions that, may or may not serve this changing landscape. So I think it's, it certainly proposed a alternative system, not just in terms of an alternative currency, but again, I come more from like the socio-cultural side of things and thinking about like what are these macro trends. And I do think Bitcoin and decentralization and blockchain represents something so much bigger, something that, perhaps we're living in a world where we operate across borders. We kind of, the internet sits above any line on a map or nation state, and yet we still have these institutions. So I think, it started to propose something that might look a little different, certainly in the financial industry, but also kind of in every aspect of life.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I think, we dealing in alternative investments, gold and silver, I always say the cryptocurrency buyer, the average cryptocurrency buyer has a very similar mindset as someone that likes precious metals, because one of the reasons people like precious metals is that it's a currency that can't be manipulated by a central bank, that it's based on, the price is based on the supply and demand of the metal, and people like having those kind of items that have a limited supply, whereas the U.S. government and the Fed just quantitative easing and all these measures to just devalue the currency. You have Bitcoin that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Bitcoin has a limited supply, which is, I think, part of the reason that the price is probably higher than some of the other cryptocurrencies. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the limited supply of Bitcoin is the reason it has a higher price and seems to be a little bit more stable than some of the other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, I mean, the limited supply of 21 million Bitcoin was, intentional, part of the design, and those 21 million Bitcoin have not yet been fully mined. And so the thinking is, once that happens, and we get there, I think there will be more stability in price, and it will maybe behave more similarly to gold. there are also debates, though, in terms of like what Bitcoin is or is for. So the white paper suggested a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, but yet it's not really useful today for payments. And so it's kind of moved into this direction where it's a store of value, or seen as or used as a store of value. I think that's kind of where the consensus is now. So in that respect, yes, there are a lot of similarities in respect to the folks involved in and interested in Bitcoin, and the folks also, interested in, gold or silver.
And what do you think, and I've sort of hypothesized this as talking to people, I'm on a lot of YouTube interviews and podcasts, and I've just kind of thrown out the idea. Do you think it's possible that one of these countries, maybe potentially in Africa, that have had currencies that have had unbelievable volatility and inflation? There's a country that I was thinking of, I can't think of it right now, that had inflation in 2008, rampant inflation. But anyways, it'll come to me. Do you think that any of these countries could potentially adopt Bitcoin as their currency?
I think if that is going to happen, it will probably be one of those countries first. I mean, you look at in Africa with M-Pesa and digital payments, I mean, a lot of countries are way ahead in terms of a digital banking or open banking infrastructures than, countries like the United States, mainly because, we have a very complex and already existing infrastructure. We have a system that is working to the advantage of many people. So it wouldn't really behoove us to immediately say, okay, we're going to get off the U.S. dollar and move to Bitcoin. But when you look at, countries like Venezuela, there's a lot of talk there, but, in countries in Africa that already have recognized the growing distrust in currencies or institutions. And it's kind of, there is an open framework to rebuild or build completely anew this infrastructure that, I think that's where we should be looking in terms of adoption first. And then, eventually, it might push some of the larger countries in that direction as well.
And it wouldn't be that difficult, right? Because everything's on the blockchain. It would be, if a country decided to adopt it, it would actually be much easier to adopt a currency like Bitcoin because everything where the transactions start and end are all confirmed, right? Wouldn't it be an easy transition to do it, as opposed to what happens in countries when their currency falls apart? They have to reintroduce a currency. They have to get people confident in that currency. Those types of things are already happening with Bitcoin. Yeah. And one thing you were saying, I was go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, but in terms of even, again, it's not a question of the technological infrastructure. Like, there's a lot of debate on saying, okay, is the technology ready? Is the network ready? Like, I think, there's a lot of work to do, but it's also pretty far along. I think the challenge or the questions are more in what you noted, the social, elements and the social engineering required to get people educated about this technology or tool, get them excited about it and place their trust there instead of, the more conventional institutions. But yet at the same time, we're already seeing this, like from the bottom up perspective. I mean, I've done work with people who are located all over the world, and they've asked, I'm thinking of, a team member of mine was working with designers based in Venezuela, and they asked to be paid in Bitcoin. And so, you're already seeing it kind of from the consumer sentiment, like from the bottoms up approach. So, I mean, I think, again, we're far along on that as well.
And those people in Venezuela wanted Bitcoin because obviously their currency is so volatile. So Bitcoin is just a safer option for them. And even though Bitcoin has volatility, they still don't believe in their own currency, which is pretty sad state of affairs. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. My theory about, one of these countries adopting it, I've been talking about for a few years, and maybe we're a few years away from that happening. But I think if we could get to that point, and we could get to the point where Bitcoin was a little less volatile, it would take the power out of dictators which most of these countries fall victim to, because obviously when you see Gaddafi and all these leaders fall apart, you find all these riches that they've amassed, and it would be much more difficult for them to do that if all the transactions of the currency of the country are tracked. So I think it would create more transparency, which I think would be good, but obviously people in government may not agree with me on that. So
yeah, I mean, it's a touchy subject, because the current system, I think of examples which this is sort of loosely related, but again, working in supply chain and illicit trade for physical goods, not necessarily currency or money laundering, but I would talk to companies and be like, okay, you have a huge counterfeiting problem. And the thing that a lot of people don't say, openly at least, is that they didn't want to solve the problem. This problem works to the advantage oftentimes of a lot of these people. So, there is that element that's kind of the elephant in the room that, you don't often discuss, but it is the reality that, yeah, sure, it might be better for everyone to have more transparency in all of our interactions, but I don't necessarily know if that's something that everyone wants or will readily accept.
I think average people that save money, good, smart people would want it. And I think it's not so different than when we were on the gold standard, because when you're on the gold standard, there has to be enough gold to back the currency that's out there, and it's a control. We're creating a control, and we know that when we were on the gold standard, the value of our currency was, it's some ridiculous percentage higher, 180%, 200% more valuable than it is today. When you're talking about before 1933 and, even 1971, we've had rapid inflation here in the United States. But these are things that people that save, people that are worried about their future, this could put something in place so that we don't have this rapid inflation, which is obviously a considerable problem for people all over the world, because our inflation is outpacing the amount of money and growth in our pay. And so you can't really retire the way you used to be able to retire, because the money is just worth less and less. And it's that silent killer that a lot of people don't talk about. And that's part of the reason that we're looking at alternative investments, alternative currencies, is to help, figure out a solution to this problem. And this debt bubble of the world, Europe, we have negative interest rates right now, which is appalling. And, these are all just measures that the governments can do, because there's no system in place to control them from just creating more debt. And it just hurts the value of all of our currencies. And so, this is a paradigm that we're in today that we need to figure out a solution for the future. What do you think in terms of, cryptocurrencies as like investments? I know you're not a financial advisor, but, we help people that put Bitcoin and Litecoin in their IRA. I don't even know if you were aware of that you could do that.
No, but that's great.
Yeah, we've been doing it for 3.5 years, and it's been very popular. And, the beauty behind it is that when let's say Bitcoin's at 8,000 something today, and then it doubles or triples, you can sell it in your IRA, and it's tax deferred. Whereas if you do it outside of the IRA, obviously you have to pay taxes right, the next year at whatever rate you're at. So it's a good way to help grow your retirement account. Obviously, cryptocurrencies are more, volatile, and, you have to be aware of that risk. But what do you think about these currencies as in terms of just investments?
I think the way that I look at it right now, and yeah, of course, this is not financial advice.
Sure.
I'm a student of the technology as much as, anyone is, but the way that I've approached it has been with a kind of a long-term investment mentality. I think for those who are, dollar cost averaging or just, getting in a little bit, per month or per year seems to be an effective strategy. I wouldn't advocate for any of the, day trading or, if that's what you're into, then by all means do it. But my approach has been, to look at these things and have kind of a diversified portfolio
Right.
and look at it in the long term. Yeah, I mean, like what you're doing seems, very compelling and interesting. And it's definitely, at the very least, a hedge against, other, instability in more traditional asset classes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important, being diverse. I think what you said is exactly what we talk about, which is getting educated, being diversified, with where the stock market is today, having some other assets in the event the stock market collapses, that you don't have all your eggs in one basket. And that's something that we kind of always talk to investors about when they call us. Bitcoin Pizza, your book, great title. Is this, are you going to be, is this, I don't know too much. Is this your first book? Are you going to be writing other books that we should be aware of? What's the future?
We'll see. I mean, this is the first book. It just came out. So I mean, I've already gotten such great feedback on, expanding on this book or expanding on ideas in the book. I'm definitely not in process of writing the next book because I just finished this one, but I'm sure as there is demand or more to discuss or more to educate, I'm really interested right now in just spreading the word and educating people and empowering them, because the craziest thing that's come out of this actually is that my intention wasn't to have people read the book and then have them come to me and say, how do I buy Bitcoin? But that's been happening. And it's been a lot of, honestly, like women and like older people, like people who were like, I guess just intimidated by the technology. They hear about it. They've maybe seen it on the news. And they're like, I don't know, like this stuff seems too out there for me. And then they finish the book and they're like, how do I get involved? Like, I feel like I want to today, or I feel like it's already too late. And I think, that's super encouraging to me.
Yeah, I would say that's funny that you brought that up, because I'm just remembering a story when we just released it out there about 3.5 years ago in the IRAs, and I met a woman who was a grandmother of a friend, and she like pulled me aside and said, my daughter said that you're doing cryptocurrencies. I've been seeing it on the news. I have this money and I want to do it, and I don't know how to do it. And it was like, she was in her 80s, I think. And I think that's fantastic that your book is getting people excited about it. And one of the things that I would do initially to get people kind of interested would be, and I actually did this with a friend, and it's funny because he just mentioned to me how much it was worth. 2 or 3 years ago, I said, well, he was tech savvy, so I had him set up a wallet, and I just sent him, a few dollars in Bitcoin, and he just got to see the transaction and how easy it was. And I think just that opened his eyes to this is money. This is like sending a wire. This is like sending an ACH. It didn't seem anything different than kind of anything else. It was easy to set up the wallet. And so I think it's the more people understand that these are currencies, that it's easy to trade them. And I've bought trips on Expedia with Bitcoin. And I've never bought anything on Overstock, but I know you can use it. So there's a lot of places that you can use it. I think one of the things you mentioned earlier was that, for peer-to-peer transactions, it still has some room to go, but it does seem like a lot of major corporations are accepting it. We reported that the Miami Dolphins now accept Litecoin.
Right. Yeah. Again, with the layer 2 solutions like the, Lightning Network, kind of solving for that problem in terms of payments, it's really, my chiropractor accepts Bitcoin. So it's not just the big corporations. If you go around, like I live in New York City and see the kind of mom and pop shops, a lot more people accept it than you would think.
Right. Yeah. No. Especially in New York, it makes sense. Everyone's doing transactions on their phone through Apple Pay or whatever, so they're always used to just not having cash. And I think that the more we get into that habit, the more people are going to use it. And I think, seeing these companies start to open up and really accept it, the more people accept it, the more it's just going to become something on the ticker as just another current. It's already there. When you go to in these channels, you look at this ticker, you look at gold, you look at the dollar, and then Bitcoin's there. So, I mean, they're already looking at it as a currency, and these things are just going to take more time to become in the forefront. But I think books like yours, making it for the layperson easy to understand and educating is really important. And I really commend what you're doing. And I'm sure there's more books to come. I'm sure you're probably exhausted from writing this one, but there's probably a lot more to come from you.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I had a blast writing it. So I hope that was also the goal. Again, the last point, having it fun. So it's a very, conversational voice, not academic, not super technical. There's one technical chapter, but, we have to have fun if we're doing this.
Yeah. What chapter is the technical chapter?
I can't, it goes into the actual, cryptography or difference between proof of work or proof of stake. I felt like I couldn't, if I didn't include at least a little bit of the how it works, that it would be too fluffy of a book. But I actually did remove a second chapter that felt it got into privacy and security, and it went a little too into the weeds. So we kept it pretty high level and fun.
Yeah, good. One thing too, before I let you go, I know you're busy, I just wanted to ask, one of the blockchain conferences I went to, they were talking about how blockchain is going to be used for health in terms of doctors, and in essence, having that information more readily available so that there isn't this time waste of, you go one place and you get an x-ray and then maybe you forget the x-ray, or the x-ray never gets to the doctor that you have to see. Can you speak on that at all, or any applications that you're seeing coming to the forefront?
Yeah, absolutely. A company I co-founded called Chronicled is actually in the pharmaceutical and life sciences space. We started with using the ledger for, pharmaceutical companies to transmit information about the movement of drugs or the, chemical compositions of the drugs or things like that. But, in a similar space, these patient medical records and systems to, have, people take ownership of that data, whether it's your medical records or it's your genetic information, and take it with you, both for convenience reasons as well as privacy reasons. There are a number of projects working on that. And I think the challenges, as with many of the projects in the financial services space, are kind of navigating the regulatory environment. So there are projects now creating HIPAA compliant blockchains or blockchain networks and things like that. So it's still, building out the infrastructure and making sure that it works within our existing context, and then building the services and solutions on top of it. But, other areas where there's a lot of activity, I would say certainly supply chain. I mean, anything in supply chain and logistics is still literally like sending physical pieces of paper around and signing them, or, PDFs over email. Like, it's very old school. So just even digitizing that, but then adding the trust layer is, for bills of lading. So when, packages arrive at a port from a ship and they're like checking the inventory and actually signing off on a paper, that's a big use case. And then I think, gaming, entertainment, arts, royalties, all of these things are very popular, and, a lot of companies are being built there as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, royalties, it's easy to understand how that would potentially streamline that process and make it easier to manage and more transparent. And in regards to health, when you talk about just being able to keep your information private, it would be a huge boost for everybody. I think everybody's always concerned about that getting released. And then I also look at the fundamental, just underlying cost of paperwork movement in the health side of the world. In theory, if these technologies come in and they're HIPAA compliant, it should reduce the cost of health, right? Health insurance, or it should make it, whether theoretically, whether that cost cut comes to us, we'll never know, or well, I guess we'll know, but in theory it should, because there is billions of dollars wasted on the paper push, right? I mean, that's that should make things more streamlined and more efficient, which is obviously the goal, and that's where we want to go with everything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I mean, if those cut costs or if we first target the efficiency side of the equation and making our businesses across industries more efficient, then yeah, in theory, we should be able to cut costs and make things more affordable for consumers. That's at least the pitch, we hear today. So I hope that actually plays out, in favor of making the world a better place.
Absolutely. Well, and I really think that this podcast has opened up a lot of doors, and probably there's a lot more that people need to learn about. It sounds like your book is a great place to start for people that just want to learn, and for the person, the 75-year-old person that is just learning about it, or maybe the 20-year-old person that's been reading about it online and just wants to get an expert to kind of summarize things in a format that they can understand. Where can they find your book, and tell us where they can get that picked up and sent to their doorstep.
So the book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Books, all the standard places. Amazon's probably easiest. If you want to buy the book with cryptocurrency, you can go to bitcoinpizza.com, my website, and just contact me directly, and we can work it out. I'll probably put like a payment processor on there at some point to accept it. But so far, the demand, it has still been mostly U.S. dollars buying the book.
Well, that would be great. I mean, it makes sense if people are buying it with Bitcoin, and it's a book about Bitcoin. So that's obviously that's a lot of fun, and that would kind of push forward the agenda that you're looking for. Well, we really appreciate it. Everyone that listens to the podcast, this has been a nice shift. We do sometimes get into some heavy political conversations, and it's nice to just have a conversation about a new currency and hopefully making better change for the world. And we really, really appreciate your time. And also, there's another way to get in touch with you, Twitter, or what's the other way that people can find you?
Yeah, my website is SamRadocchia.com, or again, you can just do bitcoinpizza.com. It also goes to my website. I'm on Twitter and on all of the other social networks at SamRadOfficial. And keep in touch.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sam. We appreciate your time. I'm sure a lot of people will be contacting you about the book, and looking forward to maybe speaking to you again in the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, and have a great day.
You too, Sam.
Thanks,
Congrats
Sam.
again on the success of Bitcoin Pizza.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of the Noble Gold Podcast. Keep building financial success between episodes by visiting noblegoldinvestments.com.